Hello and welcome. I am Kim Keen, host of the One of a Kind You podcast. I started this podcast to share my journey of my past self, a woman who was struggling with leaving her teaching career and adjusting to stay-at-home mom life, to help other women with their motherhood journeys or their work-life balance journeys, so that we can let go and make ourselves a priority without all the sacrificing. So if you're a regular listener of One of a Kind You, welcome, welcome. I'm excited to have you back for another episode. And if you're new, I'm equally excited to have you here as well. The way this podcast works is that I usually read a journal entry of mine when I was in the thick of the struggle about 7 years ago, and I reflect on what I know now and what I wish I had known then. But today, we are in for a treat because we have a special guest with us. Her name is Marsha, and she is quite the powerhouse. So she is a storytelling NLP trainer. She's a publisher and she's an author. She is a podcaster, and she's not just an author, but she's a 6-time best-selling author of her book, When She Stopped Asking Why. So she shares her lessons as a parent who dealt with teen substance abuse that really tore her family unit apart. She's been published 7 times, most recently with her co-platform, Everybody Holds a Story. And she's on a mission to continue to help women and men to speak, share, and publish their stories. Through her tools, outspoken NLP certification, programs, coaching, and podcasts, Marsha teaches the power of radical responsibility and owning your choices in your own life. And I think that is magical right there. Without anything else being said, she empowers people how to heal and own their stories, be conscious leaders, and build platform businesses that create massive impact. So welcome, welcome, Marsha.
Thank you so much, Kim. Honestly, I'm grateful to be here to have these conversations. And I still get goosebumps when I hear some of those things because and that's not an ego. That's just where I was a decade ago is nowhere near. It's a completely different person.
Yeah. And I think it's important to celebrate the wins, because I think people in general, it's easy for us to minimize the accomplishments that we have, because, I'll say the feeling of the accomplishment can be very fleeting. And so we tend to focus on what's still left to do. And I think especially as moms and women were more prone to do that than maybe men are. So I think it's amazing to celebrate the celebration.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's a lot of gold in what you've just said there, because I think that a very slippery slope, and that's easy for us to do, is to feel like we're not where we're supposed to be by a certain time. We haven't done what we are supposed to be doing yet. And so this is the power of our language and our words and what we're saying. And I'm like, always go back to the word yet, because there's still things that we're creating. And it's not about like the final destination. It is literally about the journey. And I also think that there's a lot of power in sitting back. I like to say the global view. Like when I feel super stressed or frustrated with myself and where I'm at, I literally go through the exercise of, okay, let's take the global view. And that just means back out and zoom out and look. And when I do that, I'm like, okay, all things considered, with all of these moving parts that are happening, you're doing a great job. Like, and you've got to stop and just really do that, because I think that we're all literally doing like a great job, the best that we can with the circumstances that we have.
Yeah, 100%. And I think oftentimes we look at our circumstances and allow those to define us, especially the circumstances that haven't been great in the past, whether it's the far past long ago or the near past that's not so long ago. It's very easy to let those past experiences, whether how old or new or raw they feel, to really be what we use as our guiding light for where we can be right now in this moment, but for also where we can go in the future. And I think that's such a limiting thing that we do to ourselves. I know it's because vulnerability sucks. Nobody wants to be vulnerable. And I know too.
Love those words. Sorry. Yeah.
Right?
I love it.
Yeah. And so, and it keeps us safe, because the last thing we want to do is be judged or criticized or ostracized and be like, oh, well, you're not where you need to be or where you should be. So you're not worthy of being around me. You're not worthy of being loved or liked or any of those things. So it's very much a protection thing that we do that to ourselves. And we need to shed that.
All of it. Every single thing that you've said. This is, I mean, I could do an entire podcast on vulnerability alone. And because it's a superpower, and it really is. And it is it really is the path to creating the connection that we're all craving anyways. Like we're craving, the number one desire that humans have is to have more connection. And you can't have that connection without allowing yourself to be seen. And you have to value who you are to allow yourself to be seen. And the stories that we're walking through, we are letting them define us as if there is something wrong with us, but they're the experiences that we're walking through. So it's just a changing in the story allows us to show up and be seen.
Yes, which is the power of NLP. So I've dabbled in NLP a little bit. I'm not a master, like I'm not on your level. I have a little I'll say a little itty bitty baby certification, and but I know the power of it. It's been huge in my own transformational journey. And I've seen it in other people's journeys as well. And so there's, you think like, oh yeah, language, changing your language. Yeah, right. I can't do that, but it really does because it reprograms your brain. And
Yes, all of it, all of it. It's very powerful. I would encourage anybody who's listening that if you have the least bit spark of interest, there's a ton of free content and things available. I've done a lot of podcast episodes on it. And it was the work that I didn't know that I needed, because through my story, I really lost myself completely. And then I just found a way through, but I really skipped over a lot of steps of healing. To be completely honest, I just put my head down and got to work. I'm not afraid of hard work, but I missed the pieces of healing that I didn't understand. And that has been, I did NLP selfishly for me to learn more about what did I need? How can I, support myself best? Because I still believe, yes, I'm a mom, I'm a person. And when I learn how to, build a better relationship with myself and forgive and do those healing pieces, that's allowed me to have a better relationship with my kids. And they're grown men now, right? So I'm grateful for that work, because if not, I think I would have been that very angry person who was holding the mistakes that they had made over them. And that would have served no one.
Yeah. Yeah. If anything, it would have created this ultimate rift, this divide that sometimes you can't merge back together. It's like a permanent division.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So it has been a journey and a half. And I can say honestly, like as a mom, when I first was in this position, I found myself feeling like I had failed, and what did I do wrong? And why is this happening to me? And, it was both of our boys, we were going through it. And it was such a whirlwind, like the rug's just coming right out from under your feet. And we didn't have the journey of, oh, this is a phase and it's getting out of control. And it just literally came in like a monster, and it just like ripped apart our whole house. And so many times I remember sitting here going like, how did this happen? Like, how did it get to be this point? But no matter what we did, no matter what we tried, it was a whole bunch of factors. But I've also learned so much more about addiction. I've learned so much more about how some of us are very wired. There is no try it out phase. It's I have it, I want it, I'm doing more. Like that's just where some of us are wired. And for us, it was when I could look back, like I fully owned that I made mistakes. There's no question. But I openly have had like full open conversations with my adult men, call them men now, in this space of, was there ever a time where you were not clear how we felt about it being in our house, about you know, they're like, oh no, you were crystal clear the whole way through. I'm like, good. So I made mistakes, but I was clear on what was okay and what wasn't. And for us, when it came in, it became a factor that they stopped going to school. They stopped coming home. We couldn't find them for days on end. Police started getting involved. Like we just had so many pieces that it was like people kept saying it's just a phase. And I'm like, this is not a phase. This is not, like, there's nothing about this. And people were either saying this is a phase, or they were being so openly critical of all of the mistakes that we were making. And so it became a very isolating time. I think that's the other thing. Motherhood can be very isolating and challenging alone.
Yes.
And then going through this piece and all the judgments and the criticisms was like, it just was easier to stay on our own and isolate ourselves. But it got to the point where we weren't sure where to really go, because home wasn't a safe place. like work, I was just trying to keep my face together to be able to keep my job. And my car became my solace, to be honest. My car became the only place that I felt safe and I could get my footing. I took naps in my car. It sounds terrible, but it was just, I tried to survive. Like, yeah, years of just trying to survive. That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. So 2 things to make you feel better. So when my daughters were probably 8 and 5, they were both taking dance class at the same dance studio, and the 5-year-old was done first, and then the 8-year-old had class. And so the waiting room was very small, and my 5-year-old wanted to watch YouTube Kids. So we would go sit in the car, and this was wintertime, so it was dark very early. And we would put the heat on, like put the car with the heat on, so that way we would be warm in the car while we waited for my older daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess this one day I was so warm and cozy in the car, I fell asleep. And dance class ended, and I guess one of the moms and my daughter were standing at the door, like waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and I didn't come. And so Lily, of course, is crying, thinking that I left and I wasn't coming back, which when had I ever left her and never come back? I haven't. And so then the mom said, that might be your mommy's car right there. We could go walk and look. So hand in hand, here they come. And they're apparently staring in the window at me. And I still have no clue because I'm like out cold. Casey, the 5-year-old, is in the back seat, just in YouTube Kid land, not paying a lick of attention that this woman and her sister are staring at us in the car window. And so the mom like gently taps on it, and I flew up, woke up out of a dead sleep. And she was like, dance is over. I was mortified, mortified. So, hey, it happens. No judgment.
It does happen. It does happen. I used to love that. It was my quiet, safe place to go. Yeah.
Yeah. And, we do make mistakes as moms and parents and people, really, because we get no instruction manual of how to do this thing called momming or womaning or personing. Like we get no instruction manual. So we're all literally just trying to figure it out as we go along. And sometimes we figure it out okay. And then other times we're like, whoopsies, redo.
I say that all the time. I say that there is no manual for being a mother, and there was no manual for what we walk through. Because I'll guarantee you, if you would have showed me that manual ahead of time, I'm not sure if I would have said yes to it, because it was that awful to walk through. There is so I think there's another point in the sense that when I get critical of myself, which is an actually easy thing to do, that's a bit of it's a thing I'm always working through, is to stop and say, like, again, all things considered, like, are you doing the best that you can? Did you give it everything you had? And all I knew as I searched for years there, looking for answers, trying to find, what to do next, is that I didn't want to leave a stone unturned. Like I tried everything I could think, even to the point where I remember taking my checklist to the counselor we were seeing at the time and saying, okay, so I'm like so proud of myself. I've done everything you've asked me to. Here's all my check marks. I've done every single thing you've asked. And they're like, good job. And I'm like, but you don't understand. I'm still dealing with the same stories at home. I don't understand what to do. And I'll never forget this counselor saying, that's because it's not your problem to solve. And as a mother, that's a really tough one to swallow, but what am I supposed to do with that? And they said to me that if your kids come back to you, you need to be a springboard for them, and you're nothing but a pile of quicksand right now. So your job is to take care of you. And I remember thinking, did you not hear how bad it is? Like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with that. And it sounds silly, but that was a point where it was like, I had to recognize that, yes, I actually have done every single thing I could possibly do. And it's not mine to own or carry anymore. But that also means that I have to stop blaming my kids for not having enough time, for not taking care of me, for not putting myself first, for not like helping myself become the springboard again. I can't blame them and not take responsibility for myself, because that was the mess that we were all living in. And so that was a really big turning point where it was like, okay, how do I become a springboard again? Like, how do I do that? And there was never any part of it that was overnight, just for anybody who's listening. Like it was, you're catching a snapshot now of like what was like 6 years long. And it was what could I do to be stronger today? What could I do to support myself in this moment? What is mine to own? How can I feel like do some self-care? What boundaries do I need? And it was a lot of trial and error. But when you keep doing those things, you stack those habits and eventually it can start to add up. And I started to learn the power of thoughts and the mindset and the emotions and what it all meant. And it really was a space of understanding that your thoughts are only ever doing two things. They're replaying the past or they're predicting the future. They're creating that future. Well, all I did was live in a replay the past. That's all I did. And I had to learn how to let go of all that so that I could create a future for myself and ideally, hopefully for my kids. But that was not mine to control. And that was still a very tough time because nobody wants to, you don't want to lose your kids. Like I didn't want to lose them, of course. And we came very close multiple times, but I had to learn how to grieve who they were and the choices that they were making because who I was looking at was not my kids anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And as hard as that sounds, that grieving process was required so that I could let go of who they were and what they were choosing to do and love them unconditionally, but not try and change them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's so much power in that because it doesn't release you of necessarily your parental responsibility. I think it changes your parental responsibility into a different
Mhm.
um nature. And so and it takes away that maybe codependency nature that parenting can have sometimes and allows more of a healthier, I use the word healthier lightly, like a different dynamic that isn't so codependent, but it gives them independence. It allows them to say, okay, this is working for me or this is not working for me. And it's up to me to make the change because no one else can do that for me. But they can also, and they can say, but I'm supported.
Yes, because you want them to feel supported, but it's very clear on what you're okay with and what you're not okay with.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think every parent should listen to Melody Beattie's Codependent No More. I really do,
Yes.
because I remember the counselor saying, you need to read this book. I'm like, I'm not codependent. And he's like, just read it and just take it. I literally got to the first part of the book and I'm like, oh, I am.
Mhm.
And it's a very easy thing to do. And with codependency, when two people are literally like basically sharing a responsibility of a choice, like nobody owns it. No, and if nobody owns it, nobody changes it. And as humans, we will never change a behavior without a consequence. So if
Yeah.
we are trying to own our kids' consequences, good or bad, then they will never change it because they don't have to.
Right.
And I know that's a really tough one for parents,
Yes.
but I can tell you from just our story, this is only from my story, in the sense that when I let them feel the consequences of their behavior and I didn't shame them for it and I didn't like criticize or judge them, it's like, no, that was your choice. So this is what you have to deal with. This is my choice and I'm going to own my own choice. When I started to do that, it was this point, it was a big turning point where it was like, okay, well, if that's what you want for your life, I still love you, but my job is not to push or pull you through life. My job is to guide you. I'll support you. I'll walk beside you, but like you got to walk your own path. And if this is what you want, it's not what I want for you. But if this is what you want, this is what comes with it.
Hmm.
This is the consequences that comes with it. And this might sound harsh to some people, but I actually even drove my kids as minors past the jail. And I was like, I will visit you there. I will not bail you out. I will not. You will stay
Hmm.
because I can't fix this. I've tried everything I can. And so it did require that the ownership piece, when I talk about like owning your choices, it was never said from a space of shaming them. It was said from a space of empowering them
Yeah.
that
And
they can create change.
yeah, I don't think it's harsh at all because I think sometimes it's hard for children. I know it's hard for adults sometimes for us to think long term to see what our consequences of our behaviors are. And it's
Mhm.
even that much harder for kids to do it because their brain isn't fully formed. It's the parts of their brain that work with that ability to have that logical reasoning and all of that. It's not there yet. So they need us to help guide them and say, hey, you have two options. It's like the crossroads speech. You have
Yeah.
road A and you have road B. If you keep this road A, here's where you'll go long term. If you keep on this path, you're going to be road B, and this is where you're going to be. And let me show you what that looks like, because that's not in our immediate existence of life to be familiar with a prison. So let me drive you to the community where the prison is. Let me show you what the building looks like. Let me explain to you what life is like in there. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough for you to decide that you would rather make a U-turn and come back to road A.
Mm-hmm.
So, so it's all in how you deliver it. So I don't think it's harsh. I think it's sometimes necessary. My children are only 13 and 10, but I still have to do the same thing with them sometimes because they're girls and they think they know it all. And I'm like, oh, the apple did not fall far from the tree.
Oh, trust me. I know. I know. I know. And it's an interesting thing to navigate. And
Yeah.
I hope that at least by sharing some of my story here, that it will, empower people that if you find yourself in that situation, like reach out and find groups, that's what I started to do. I didn't find that support in my close circle. I didn't find it in my family at all because our story scared people. And because it scared people, it did not bring the best out in them. And I had to learn how to navigate that. So Facebook groups, parent groups, counseling groups became a great source of support for me. And it wasn't until I went into my first Facebook group that I recognized that, okay, I can't be the only mom in the world who is struggling with this. There's 100,000 moms in this group. Like that was such an eye-opening moment to recognize it wasn't just me. And the
Yeah.
second I could get over thinking that this isn't my fault, that's when a lot of things started to change.
Yeah. And so how were you able to reconcile with it not being your fault? Because I think most moms, most parents would blame themselves 100%, say, this is all my fault. I could have, would have, should have done so many things differently. I should have seen the signs, yada, yada, yada. So how did you reconcile that?
It was very messy, and it was certainly not, again, not a straight linear line. But I know there came a point where, my husband was like, we should have tried this. We should try this. Like, I wish we'd have done this differently. And I'm like, you know what? Those days are all done.
Hmm.
We've done every single thing that we can think of. Is there any rock or stone or phone call that we have not turned over? And I can say in full honesty, there really wasn't much left that we could have tried. And when it came to the schools, we had a very open relationship with the schools. I did not try and hide it whatsoever. And I mean, you're not hiding it anyways. They know there's problems. Like it was not a secret. And so it really became a point of recognizing, back to that checklist, that like, yes, you have done everything you can. And so that means that there is a point here where I can only own my own choices. I cannot take on something that is not mine to carry.
Hmm.
And so that's where some of it really started to turn. And I remember at one point when my husband and I were talking, and he said, I wish we could go back and change it all. And I said, here's the thing. I think that even if we could go back and change it all, we also have to know that we still might be in the exact same situation that
Hmm.
we're in today, because there are choices that are made outside of us. And
Hmm.
I think that's the thing, is recognizing as a parent, right? When our kids are little, you see the kid in the grocery store throwing the fit. And sadly, what is one of the first things we do? We look at the parents, right?
Hmm.
We look at the parents, and it's like this whole judgment look right from the get-go. But there comes a point where we don't share a brain with our kids. Like,
Hmm.
as much as we want to think it's that simple that we can tell them right from wrong, we also have to allow them to make mistakes and learn. And we
Yeah.
have to allow them. And I tell you, from the point of learning to own my own choices and not take theirs on, as things really started to change there, I started to see like what was my responsibility and what was theirs. And it wasn't mine to carry. And when I started to understand what wasn't mine to carry, it got easier to look at it and say, okay, that's not mine. That's not mine. This is yours. And I think for me, some of my biggest turning points came when I recognized that I had done everything I could on my sheet.
Hmm.
We almost lost them both, only in a span of a couple days apart.
Oh, wow.
And both things happened in our home, which sounds awful. And it was awful. But that was also a very clarifying moment because I sat there and went, my way's not working. Your way's not working. And I think that we can all relate to standing in those moments of trying to figure out, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And my answer to myself started to become, you do know what to do. You just don't like the answer. You don't like the answer. It's not your job to like the answer. It's your job to follow through. And so instead of trying to fix them, this was a one little shift that made a big difference for me. Instead of trying to fix them, my job became giving their higher future self a chance. And by fighting for their future self, I wasn't fighting for the person who was in front of me. I was fighting for the future version of my son who had a chance to, make a difference and do something in the world. And that meant that, like, let them fail at 15. I fought for them to be able to fail school. Like, you wouldn't even believe how at this point schools were passing them. Police didn't have a problem. Like, no one had an issue with what they were doing except for mom and dad. And so what happens with that situation is there's no consequences, right? So why are they going to change anything?
Right.
So I started to fight for their future self. And that meant that if something was wrong, police were getting involved. If they were not going to school, I would fight for them to fail because I wanted them to fail at 15 and not 25 or 30.
Yes.
And I think is as hard as our story was, I think those points are critical for any parent.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think, when they fail at 15, there are repercussions to their actions, but they're not as long lasting as those repercussions would have been at 25 and 30. And I think, unfortunately, schools are kind of in a rock and a hard place because I have an after school program for teen girls, and it's really about self empowerment, self esteem, confidence, navigating healthy relationships, things like that, based on my own experience as a teenage girl in an abusive relationship. And a lot of schools are like, no, not interested. Because if you say, oh, yes, we're interested in that, then there is some admission that there is a problem. And so no one wants to admit that there's a problem, because then that means that other people are also now going to be accountable for fixing the problem. And then they're like, oh, what we thought was a little teeny tiny problem with only 2 people, now we're realizing it's a problem with 100,000 people, and now 500,000 people. Oh, we don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And it's really such a disservice, because if we actually took the time to focus on the small group of people that are having the problem, it wouldn't be ballooning into this huge pandemic almost I guess the word is pandemic, or maybe it's not, endemic, something like that. But one of those big, huge problems, it wouldn't balloon into that because we would be mitigating as it would come along.
That's every single thing that you've said there. That is such a big factor. And I'm grateful the way that it all came out and the way it did work out for us, but that was a big piece of it. And we were very fortunate. We had good relationship with the school. They actually brought my husband and I in to talk to other parents. I really admired the fact that they were like, we don't know what to say. So maybe, do you mind? And it's like, no, we don't mind. And all of a sudden it was like, I remember the day that we were supporting this small group of parents, and you're looking around the room and they all looked like us. I think this is a really big, scary piece. It's easier for us to judge and assume that this problem only affects certain people. And to be honest, when I first started to share my story openly, I was scared to death. There's no question. But when I felt called to, and the other reason that I felt called to is because I know what it felt like to be so alone and isolated in my story. And I also didn't fit the model of what people thought I should look like to have this problem. So if we want to start to change the judgments and the opinions and the thoughts that we're having, and we want to start to have open conversations, I felt like it was actually my obligation. I'm not saying that as a martyr. I actually felt called that it was my job to step forward and start to change the narrative on it. And you could see when people would say, wait, you guys had problems with that? Like, I'm like, yes. And there are hundreds of thousands of me, hundreds of thousands. So the only way we can change the shame conversations is literally to give them a voice. It's the only way. There's no other way to change a shame story I mean, shame loves secrecy, it loves privacy, it loves judgment. And the second you start to share it, I could feel like this weight was coming off of me, that it was like, oh God, that feels like I just lost like 100 pounds off of my body and carrying it. And what happened was magical in the sense that no matter where I shared, I would have like people follow me, women follow me into the washroom and say, like, that's my story. I've never told a soul. It's been 30 years. It's been 40 years. And seeing these women, and not just women, but this is women that were connecting with me, sharing their stories and seeing people holding on to these stories for decades was just making me nauseous. And it was like, I can't, maybe, maybe I'm in this position for a reason. Maybe I'm meant to do something with it. What if I could take my pain and turn it into a purpose? It helped me to heal. It helped me to forgive. It actually helped me to build a better relationship with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a blessing in disguise that I didn't know was coming.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of finding the gratitude in it. Because, you're right. If going back to when you're like, well, yeah, we could have changed it, but we might actually still end up in the same space, because it's like you mentioned, even before that, it's really about the journey and the experiences that you learn and have on the journey than it is the final outcome.
It's a tough one. It's a really tough one to find gratitude when you're in the thick of it. Like I actually used to I would have people say to me, please, if you're listening, please don't say this to anybody who's in the middle of trauma, and say, well, this is happening for you. And I'm like, I could punch you right now. Like I can't, you don't say something like that when somebody's in the middle of it. But as I started to work my way through it, the way I frame it is that like we can't love who we are and hate every single experience that we've lived that's made us who we are. I am who I am today because of the challenges that I've walked through. And I was meant to walk through them because I'm a very different person now than I was before. And I really believe that the person that I was before wouldn't have survived if I didn't let go and stop trying to fix, manage, control the world to be this version of what everyone thought that we should be. So it was a blessing in disguise. And now I can look at it in a way with gratitude, in the sense that it shaped me into who I am. It helped me to build a better relationship with people in my circle and my kids. And I wouldn't be doing any of the work that I do right now that lights me up, that fills my soul, if I had not walked through some of those most incredibly difficult years.
Yeah, it goes back to the purpose of your pain, the pain in your purpose.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. It puts us on the trajectory to do the things that we're really put on this earth to do. I have a friend, and so growing up, her son was little and had a crush on me because he's 6 years younger. He was best friends with my little brother. And 3 years ago, he passed away, and from addiction, and completely blindsided. No one ever saw it coming. And so now her mission is the same, is that she helps other women who are other parents, really, who are dealing with the loss of a child from addiction. And she's doing so much amazing work, outreach, events around support, and not just for the parents, but around just addiction in general, doing clothing drives for people who are, in like sober living houses, who don't have the means to get the things that they need to be able to go get the job and go to the interview and all of those things. And she said the same thing. She was like, if I hadn't lost my son, I would not be doing any of this. And that realization really helped her move through the guilt and the shame and all of the negativity associated with the experience. And so there's so much power in that. It allows you to take that responsibility and that ownership, but also to get you out of that victim state, because it can linger. That victim state can linger for so much longer after the fact.
I 100% can. And victim, I often share, like, to me, people say, well, how do I know if I can share a story? And I'm like, if you are stuck in a victim mindset, no, that's not the time, because no change happens when you're in that mindset. And I don't judge it. I spent years there. Years there. But victim energy will not change anything. And if you're waiting for the answer, I remember even saying, like, if we're waiting for the answer as to why we're walking through this, what answer is going to make all of this chaos okay? There is no answer that I'm going to feel like, oh yeah, that's exactly why we're walking through it. Like, there is no answer. And so when I wrote my solo book in 2017, the name came to me and I had support with it with publishing. And I went to her and I said, it needs to be called this. And she said, that's too long of a title. No one's going to get it. And I'm like, I don't care. It's exactly. And it's when she stopped asking why, because that was my turning point. The why was killing me. Why only matters when you're moving towards a goal. If you're asking why, you're playing in a victim pool and nothing will change. And so for me, it's a slippery slope. Still, it can happen. Is when I ask why, I switch it to what. What is an action word? And I would literally do that all day long during those years. It was like, okay, no, the why doesn't matter. What can you do right now? Oh, well, you can listen to this book. You can listen to this podcast. You can go for a walk. And that's enough right now. It doesn't sound like it's a lot to magically change your life, but when you stack those habits every single day over and over, they do add up.
Yeah. And so when I'm working with a client, we don't say the why word, because we also say what, because when you get stuck in that why word, it allows you to just keep telling the same story over and over and over. And the more you tell that story, the more it becomes a part of who you are and the harder it is to change. And so that was one thing that I really resonated with, that you had shared with me before we hit record, when you initially reached out, about how your belief of the story is the only story. It's only because of the meaning that you give it.
Yeah. And those words, that mantra, I say every single day, because it's like, I will immediately think about something and I'm like, oh, I failed at that. That did not, I'm like, oh, no, the story only ever has the meaning that you give it. And that's like, those words saved me and they continue to save me over, because it depends on what lens you apply to something. I can apply a lens to something that is always going to paint a picture of failure, or I can apply a lens that is going to allow me to say, okay, but this is what I learned. I'm now a different person. I get to do work that's good in the world because of it. Like, it's all the lens that we choose to apply, the words that we use, and the stories that we're telling ourselves, all of it.
Yes. And when you actually change that lens to a perspective that allows you to see past the negative experience or the limiting beliefs or whatever it is that's not really working for you, that's where the change happens.
Yeah, you just said something there. I just want to write that down, because I love what you're saying there, and it made me think of something. Is that you can't change that perspective until you change the lens. Like, you can't. If you're going to look at it as a victim, you're never going to see anything bigger than what that little like vision is going to show you. You want to change the lens, so that you can have a different perspective.
Yeah. So it's like the telescope reference. Like, if you hold the telescope one way, it's a very narrow view, but if you like flip it around, then it's a bigger view. And
I just got that analogy right when you said it. I'm
Yes.
like, I don't know how to write that down fast enough, but I love what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I just said that to someone else the other day too. It's like, I was like, it's like looking through a telescope and you only see the little itty bitty tiny view, or like, instead of looking through like the windshield and then seeing the whole big picture.
It changes the view. And I think that it's not easy to change the view, especially when you're in a difficult story. But I think there has to come a point where it's like, I am so tired of seeing it this way that I don't want to stay here anymore. And people say, yeah, but it's really hard to share your story. It's really hard to put yourself out there. And I say this with so much love. I'm just super direct. Like, you get to choose your hard. I know what hard felt like, being stuck and isolated by myself, feeling like angry, hating myself, all these people. I know what that hard felt like. I didn't know what this hard felt like. And so, yes, it felt hard to start to share my story and be that person who would talk openly about these topics. But I started to believe that maybe that's why we walk through this. Like, maybe that's why we're in this position. Maybe that's why we're here. Like, maybe that's what I feel like my calling. And I remember my husband saying, if we can walk through this and we can get through this with our kids, do you still feel passionate about doing this? I'm like, 100%. He's like, all right, then. Like, it's just like, you're going to do it anyways. Like, he's just he knows that. But it's, I started my podcast in 2017, where we've just released 538.
Wow.
And I know it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I wanted to share this from the sense that, in the beginning, back in 2017, when I was releasing my book, I said, I want to start a podcast. And people are like, you have just lost it. Like, what are you thinking? And I'm like, There is nowhere that people are talking about difficult stories.
Yeah.
And the answers I kept getting back, because you're not supposed to do that. And I'm like, maybe that's why we're in the position that we're in.
Yes.
And so I remember saying, I don't care. I'm going to figure it out. We're going to do it. And they said, where are you going to find people who want to share those vulnerable sides? It's not a problem. Let me just say
Yeah.
that it's not a problem. I turn way more people away than I take on right now, because it's not a problem finding the
Yeah.
stories. We're craving more realness. We are all craving more like real, honest stories that we can learn and from each other and support each other. I really believe that's what we're craving now.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Because I think we're all kind of over the highlight reel lifestyle.
Done. It's so done. We're done with it. And I will always, I show up. I'm very positive. I am very positive, but I'm very real.
Yes.
And I will share those parts. And so it's interesting because, I share kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly online, like in what it's like from my perspective. And I get some very nasty hate messages. I get some and it's like, you know what? You guys are just giving me fuel and content. Like, if you want me to stop, I'm the wrong person to do that with. But it really is. It's just like, I choose to take it and use it and be real. And I think that's what we are all craving more of.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And so, if someone is in their journey, whether they're dealing with a child who is going through a substance abuse issue, or they're kind of in their own journey and it's their own healing journey, not even related to their kids. So I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't prep you for this question before I hit record.
I'm good.
So if someone's like, like, okay, yeah, Marsha, I'm really digging everything you're saying, but like, I'm just not where you are. So if I want to start, like, what do I do? What's the first step I take?
Yeah, I think the very first step that you take is a tiny step outside of your comfort zone. You don't have to go onto the big stage. You don't have to write the book. I started with Facebook Lives. I actually pulled a video up of a Facebook Live from me from 2013.
Wow.
And I did the video screen, like I did the green screen with the video, and I played it, and then I was beside it. And it was just like, again, going back to what we said in the very beginning, just really honoring that I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I knew I didn't want to stay where I was.
Yeah.
And so I think that it was a tiny step. Going into the Facebook groups was a tiny step. Finding a way to start to journal, to share, to create communities was a step. So they might feel like baby steps, but I'll tell you, those baby steps add up. So that would be where I would start. And if you're still not finding that, like, allow yourself to reach outside of your comfort zone to find community. Sorry, my dog.
That's okay.
Right? Not perfect.
Right. I have two, and I'm surprised that they're being quiet.
Yeah.
So no worries. I have 2 dogs, 2 kids. And I said, I'm going upstairs. I'll be in my closet. I'm recording this podcast episode. Of course, dogs don't understand human language. So inevitably one of them
they don't
comes
care.
in.
I'm
So
sure
no
another
worries.
dog just walked by the house. But anyways, that's the piece of it is that allow yourself to stretch outside and just start to find your voice. You're not going to get it right in the beginning, but you're never going to get it right if you don't start.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, because in my own journey, there were times where I was so afraid to try something because I was afraid of, quote unquote, failing,
I know.
that I stifled myself. And once I actually gave myself permission to just start trying, whether it was a gratitude journal, a regular journal, meditation, yoga, whatever the case it was, like just giving myself to try something and then it not working, then I thought, okay, let me go back to the list that I made of all the things that I can try. Okay, let me try the next one. And so again, when you're changing your perspective of it being a failure or just needing a shift or a tweak, then that's also another huge game changer. So I think that's perfect. Amazing feedback and advice is just take one baby step, whatever that might be, and just be okay if it doesn't feel right or doesn't work that first time. Just keep stepping.
Yeah, just keep stepping and take that inventory with yourself. I think it's interesting because as humans, we want to add more, like try something more. Sometimes we have to stop doing something. And that can actually be more powerful than adding something else. And so for me, it was like, I really started to find things that I need to stop doing that were not helping or supporting me. And that could be the people I was around, things that were happening. And so you don't always have to add something. You might be able to easily take something away that is not working.
Yeah, beautiful. So, ladies, if you found this episode helpful, please feel free to share it with a friend because the more the merrier. And if you're looking to connect with Marsha, all of her ways to connect are in the show notes. So don't feel as though you have to go Googling her because I didn't even tell you her last name because I didn't want to butcher it. So
Okay, so it's like Van Weinsberg. It's a long name, but I
so I
made
was right. I should have just gone for
you
it.
should have see
I should have gone for it.
you should have gone for it because you had it. But it's definitely I've taken everything. The cool thing on Google, if you started to type Marsha Van W, it's like 99.9% me all the way through. And I've done that all through social media. So you'll find me.
Perfect. So, but you don't have to worry about even trying to figure out how to spell her last name because it's all in the show notes. So just go right there and just click there. Save yourself the spelling bee, nerves of like, oh my God, am I spelling it right? Is it this? Is it that?
Yeah.
And like, yes, that's my final answer. So, because it's all right there. So, Marsha, thank you so, so much for joining us for another episode of One of a Kind You. It's been so great chatting with you. All the little golden nuggets that you've shared have just been amazing. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Kim. Honestly,
Yeah.
I love having these conversations and I love the doors that it opens and the connections that we get to have. So thank you.
Yes, of course. It's a pleasure. So, ladies, please feel free to leave a review as well, because I take the time to read all the reviews to ensure that this podcast continues to be what you're looking for, a place of guidance, support, a one-stop shop, really, because let's face it, us ladies, we have to stick together. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.